Geography and You presents.
Welcome to the another episode of the Air We Fear podcast. I'm your host Hiteshika and today we have an exciting conversation ahead. Joining me as the discussant is Dr. Sulagna Chattopadhyay, Editor-in-Chief, Geography and You, who will guide us in this insightful discussion on air pollution and environmental activism. Our guest at the studio today is a youth icon, Abhiir Bhalla, one of BBC's top youth environmentalists and a passionate climate advocate. With over 11 years of making waves, Abhiir has made significant contributions through various platforms and campaigns, including Swachh Chetna, a youth led initiative focused on environmental awareness and action. He has spoken at prominent international events such as COP28, COP27, CHOGM 2022, and serves as youth advisor to the governing board of CHEC International. But before I pass the conversation over to Dr. Chattopadhyay, don't forget to subscribe and like our YouTube and Spotify channels for more pressing issues we are covering. With that, over to you, Dr. Chattopadhyay, to lead this conversation.
Thank you, Hiteshika. Abir, we are delighted to have you today, and I'm hoping that we are going to have this really inspirational talk with you, with the youth, really, getting all excited and wanting to do stuff.
Absolutely, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm hoping I'm able to inspire a few young people out there.
You are India's young environmental warrior. Now, people like you really, rekindle hope in us. So, why did you start with air pollution? Because environment is a very wide field, but you chose to start with air pollution. Is that correct?
That's right. So it wasn't that I specifically chose to start by working on air pollution. It just sort of happened. I mean, to be very honest, about 13 years ago, back when I was in class 6, I was not any different from perhaps even President Trump, because at worst I used to think climate change is a hoax, and at best I used to think that it's not my problem to deal with. But of course, 13 years later, my views have changed drastically. And I remember when I was in class 6, I used to have these seasonally recurring allergies, a cough, a cold, which still happen to this date. And at the time, my GP, my physician, had told me that it's because of prolonged exposure to Delhi's air pollution.
Okay.
And as a side note, I was the teacher's pet in all my classes, but we used to have this environmental workshop in school once every 2-3 weeks. But I would go out of my way to skip that workshop because I thought it was boring. And one day I got caught bunking that workshop, and my class teacher was, I didn't get detention and stuff because I was in her good books, but she sent me back into the workshop. And this would have been a few days before or after I had gone to meet the doctor. And it so happened that they were also talking about air pollution that day. So I was like, chalo, aaj sun hi lete hain, matlab phas gaye hain class mein, to sun hi lete hain. And listening actually paid off. And that's when I started to realize how polluted Delhi's air really was and unfortunately continues to be, and how it's adversely impacting not just me but everyone else I know and love and hold dear to myself. So for me, that was a bit of a waking point, a turning point, because I realized that for me that was, even now when I do my talks, I do my workshops, for me my primary objective is not to tell people that you should care about air pollution or you should care about water pollution or waste segregation. For me, at the end of every conversation, such as this one, I want people to know, why should you care? That's the question I want them to have answered, right? And for everyone it can be different. For me it's air pollution, for someone else it could be something else. But today we live in a world, whether we're in a metro city, whether we're in a rural place, wherever we are, climate change is impacting us in some way or the other.
Correct.
And that's sort of my objective, to get people to know why they should care, how it's affecting them, and what they can do about it.
So, just to take you back to your
Yeah.
school a bit, so were you one of those geeky kids? I mean, my question here is, how did it resonate with your classmates when you suddenly decided that this is my thing?
That's actually a very interesting question, which I don't get asked a lot. So, I mean, it was gradual, right? So, it wasn't like overnight I attended that workshop and my views changed. I joined the environment club after that. Then I started going for these anti-firecracker campaigns around the neighborhood. Then I started my own initiative, which I'd like to talk about in some time, Swachetna. And, I think by the time I reached class 9 or 10, it was actually amusing because my environmental advocacy started to create a buzz in the school, which was good because it was inspiring my batchmates and others. But at the same time, for my close circle of friends, they used to be very jealous because I used to get to miss my classes to go represent the school at some workshop or something. So they would jokingly tease me that, oh, there goes Bhalla to straighten every blade of grass in the field, this, that, some sort of joke to undermine it. But whatever, it got the message out, right? And it seemed to work. So yes, I was fairly studious as a back in school, but this was also something which, I mean, environment and politics, those were the two things I was known for in school. So yeah.
So you did have a bit of a rough, what you say, the roughing out of these kind of
Yeah,
situations.
teasing and all of that was
So,
there, of
so
course.
which is
Yeah.
why I wanted to bring this to light is most people most young people who want to stand out are afraid to stand out because they don't want to be different.
Yeah.
So you chose to be different, and that was remarkable.
Yeah, and I mean, I not on an entirely related note, but fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, but most environmentalists I see in my field, whether they're academically environmentalists, or even practitioners, a lot of them are women. So back in school, I remember that I used to have my boys group who used to tease me for being, because all the environment club heads were all girls, right? So I remember being teased that array, like, nobody out and out said ye ladkiyon ka kaam hai, but the implication was always there that you're the first guy, at least in school, doing it. Now, of course, having gone to the COPs, having seen these conferences, but mind you, I still think, and obviously it's very lucky that this field is one of the few fields perhaps where it is female dominated, so I'm very grateful for that. But that doesn't mean that men should be discouraged from participating. As you said, people shouldn't be afraid to stand out.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah.
So, taking that forward, like now you've just mentioned, so many platforms, like you've been on the BBC, the TEDx, you had a phenomenal number of talks at this very young age. And you mentioned that COP deliberations you've been part of. So, for the young people, the scenario, I mean, even for us actually, we've become pretty cynical about how things are shaping up, how it's all going. It doesn't seem going very well. It all seems very downhill.
Yeah.
So what is this one thing that you would like to talk about that emerges as a hopeful scenario out of all of the things that you're seeing in the adult world?
No, that's again a good one because there's so much gloom and doom. Climate is made out to be this murky issue where, till date, I think a lot of people face the issue of, मैं क्या कर सकता हूँ? What can I do about this? This issue is larger than life, and that's a whole other conversation as to why that is the case and how we can overcome the way we think about climate change being too large for us to work on. But to your question, I think, what I am optimistic about is there is good news in climate. Look at the ozone, for example. Look at tiger numbers bouncing back up, for example, right? In a more specific context, India is, well, not 75%, I should say. And if you look at renewable energy across hydro, wind, and solar, specifically, at least as far as solar is concerned, and to some extent where wind energy is concerned, we are well ahead of the curve, and well on track to meet our targets. Hydropower isn't being implemented the most responsibly, but and not in line with our timelines, but it's still being done, right? Um, we are seeing a small yet significant, relevant downturn in the consumption of coal. It's not going to go down entirely, but we are seeing that the pattern is inching in a certain direction, right? It's going to take another 10 years, perhaps. We are increasing focus, and this is a contested topic, but we are increasing focus on civil nuclear energy, which I think in the interim is a good solution while we bridge the gap between, say, renewable energy and green hydrogen. I think the gap has to be bridged by civil nuclear energy. So we're going the right direction
Okay, interesting.
when it comes to that. And otherwise, I mean, I think, we've seen issues like cleaning the Yamuna, issues like air pollution are the same, if not worse, as they were 15 years ago, right? But that doesn't mean we give up hope, because especially in when it comes to issues like this, hope is all we have. But a critical part of it is actually working to solve it in our day-to-day lives, making piecemeal changes, and making everyone around us realize that, you know why should I care and what can I do about it. It goes back to that.
Okay, just to take a small point from you about ozone. There is something in, I mean, I'm sure you're also aware that uh, ozone, the Montreal Protocol, and the
Yeah.
CFCs and how we were made to curb all of that. Ozone is not, stratospheric ozone is not a problem of tropical countries, because there
Yeah.
is no stratospheric ozone above the
Absolutely.
tropical countries.
More for Australia and the
More
likes,
for,
which are
yeah,
closer to the
temperate
poles.
nations. Yeah. So basically, we changed our technologies for something that wasn't our problem. Now, you can look at it in two ways. It is also a kind of a global climate in climate change,
Yeah.
where the burden of the change also falls on countries like ours.
Yeah.
So this burden that we are carrying, um, you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to give a hopeless and a helpless kind of situation, but the way taking it from there, where do you think? Because we don't have to only fight the problem within; we also have to fight the problem outside.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated scenario where it's not only the country's problem and the attitude problem and the people problem. It's also the problem of technology, which we don't have, and sometimes we need to, and most of the times actually, we need to get it from outside. So, in this scenario, what do you think? The fact that we need to care and we should not lose hope. Do you not think that a greater need for a movement or a youth movement should be there, with people like you leading such movements? What is your take on that?
I mean, the short answer is yes, absolutely. We need a youth movement, and you made a very interesting point on the ozone, discussion that we had. But that's actually very comparable in some senses to the debate we're having around carbon emissions as well, right? Because the Western world, let's just say US as the convenient example, and now with Trump having come, I have no idea where things are going. Let me put that out there. Nobody does, I think, not even himself. But that being said, I think it's so going back to the carbon point that I was making, right? When we look at the US, Europe, their thing is they have look back home, they have to convince their local parliaments in terms of why are they paying reparations, right? So they want to do climate finance, they want to do loans, the likes, etc. But the reality, the entire word reparations, means that it's not going to be a loan. It's meant to be a reparation, something you're paying back for, right? And countries like India, the South, let's say the emerging global South, are correctly perhaps of the opinion that, boss, you polluted as much as you had to get where you are. Now it's time for us to do that, right? So both arguments have their merits and demerits, and again, that's a whole other conversation. But the larger linkage that I'm trying to make is the fact that um, sometimes, not sometimes, almost always, environmental issues affect different societies, geographies very differently, right? But take the ozone thing, for example, right? The reason we call it a success today is because there was almost unanimous global consensus on solving it, right? So, similarly, right now, what we are failing to do is to find a mechanism which is globally acceptable, whether it's for climate finance, whether it's for reparations, whether it's just for agreeing on even the whole 1.52 degree
Yeah.
reduction. Now, coming to your main question about young people and the movement, right? Um, Short answer is yes, we definitely need that. And I think, although, and again, this is um, contentious perhaps for some, but I have my share of criticisms for Greta Thunberg's movement. But what I do give her credit for, and that's a hands down massive sort of globally successful movement that she led, was that she contextualized young people um, in front of the climate issue, right? She sort of juxtaposed them together, and she made young people a key stakeholder in the climate debate, right?
Correct.
So I think movements like that need to be much more wide reaching, all encompassing, in the sense it needs to be rural India, urban India, and it needs to be contextual, right? You can't have a
Of
Fridays for
course.
Future
Yeah.
strike without each sort of region understanding what its implications are, or maybe there are other ways to protest or to make the same argument to the government or whoever is in charge, right? But short answer is yes, it's very necessary for us to get there.
Yeah, but there's an extension to that. India doesn't have something like a green party, a resonating one, that is. And we don't have environmental youth movement. And here you are sitting in front of me, an icon. Now tell me, is it possible? Because India understands only two things, politics and cricket.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that you can take this to a political platform now that you understand that we need a movement like this?
Yeah, so you've led me to exactly what I was wanting to say, but I'll need 2-3 minutes to explain
Yes,
this.
please.
So the way we look at, so you're right. There are youth movements, but they're disjointed, right? It's too fragmented. They're not united, and obviously, when a movement like this swells together, as we've seen in history, there'll always be, factions, for lack of a better word, which would want to do something in a more strong way or something in a more passive way, right? So yes, a youth movement is needed, and you hit the nail on the head. I think political relevance is what is necessary. So an interesting fact, I was just talking about this at Hindu College last week, is that we say that we are, we don't say we are the world's largest democracy. And it's shocking that even though climate change as a concept was brought up in the 1980s, if not earlier, it took us nearly 40 years to mention the words climate change in the electoral manifestos of the two largest parties. The INC and the BJP both did not mention the words climate change in their manifestos until 2019.
Correct.
And and वो literally बस mention था. It was like one sentence,
Yeah.
right? Now, thank God for better, again, hopefully for better. The 2024 manifesto saw almost 25 or 30 bullet points and again, I'm just saying INC and BJP because they're the two largest parties, but across the board, even parties, smaller parties like AAP, found mention of, climate change, found mention in their manifestos. What was interesting though, or unfortunate also, was that none of the electoral rallies actually covered it. If you watched any of the 2024 rallies, you'll see politicians are talking about infrastructure, they're talking about defense, foreign policy. If you're lucky, they're talking about women's safety. But climate change didn't make the cut in verbal discourse, which is what is used to communicate to the masses, right? Now let's pause that there. Today, I think we're in a catch 22. For the younger audience specifically, there's this meme on Instagram where there are three Spider-Man standing in a triangle and all pointing at each other. Okay. Which in some senses is symbolic of this catch 22 or the vicious cycle that we're trapped in, because society thinks climate change is too large of an issue for us to work on. Institutions, namely corporates and government, say, what can we do about it? Society isn't following the laws we've introduced, right? Best example, the firecracker ban.
Yeah.
Last 7-8 years, there's been a firecracker ban. It's falling on deaf ears. And government's argument is, look, we can't arrest 20,000 people in one night. What do you expect? On the other hand, as I said, society thinks that, it's the big MNCs or the government which has to enforce changes. So we're all in this, sorry to say, tu meh situation where nobody knows who's going to be the first mover. But my argument is that the onus lies on us as society, right? I believe that society, namely people like you and I, will bring about only 20% of the change, right?
Okay.
But, and that's the important one, we need to be the first 20%. The 80% change will come from the governments and from corporates and the big bad stakeholders which exist. But for that 80, we need to be the 20 that gets the ball rolling. And the best example, right? As you said, the country understands politics and cricket, right? Now, let's assume our politicians are rational for a moment. What does a rational politician want? They want votes,
Exactly.
right? So, hypothetically, I remember there was a news article in 2020 which said there were 1,200 complaints of firecrackers filed with the Delhi police. We know that's obviously a minuscule number. What if those 1,200 complaints were to become, say, 300 complaints over 4 years? To the rational politician, that would send an argument, would send the message that 900 people have stopped bursting firecrackers and started caring about the environment. So the rational politician will go up on stage the next day and say, "Hum pollution ka ban enforce karenge." And he would do so in the hope of the fact that those 900 people would give him a vote, because now he's talking about an issue that matters to them. And therefore, my argument that the first 20% of the change has to come from us, and more specifically from young people, because we are at the center of a world where we are growing up and being told that ye Bharat ki yuva peedhi hai, demographic dividend, all of those things, So we are the ones well positioned to influence all stakeholders around us.
Brilliant.
That was my very long answer.
No, but that's brilliant. That's amazing. Because
Thank you.
I like this 20% catalyst idea.
Yeah.
And I hope, we have takers of this idea so that you can grab it and turn the attention on themselves. And
Yeah.
that'll be fantastic. The firecrackers is one issue that I want to just go back a bit on it. So why do you think that, one, are firecrackers necessary? Not during the polluting times, but generally, do you think if it's not necessary, if there is a ban, then shouldn't the upstream, which is the industry that produces it, should be banned? So once it's not there in the market, it's just not there for anybody. Why are we not, what in your view constrains us from going to the upstream and stopping the industry, whether it's plastic or whether it's firecrackers or whether it's anything, but look for an attitudinal shift instead and look for change within the communities, which is very difficult. It's a long term, educational project which we are not investing in any case. So, and you imagine that change would happen, but it's much easier to do it upstream and just stop the stuff. What is your view?
It's simple because, you know, you have to keep in mind that the same companies manufacturing the firecrackers, either directly or indirectly, are the ones funding political parties, right? Directly or indirectly. And so, and that's why corporate interests win. I mean, again, I'm not going to name companies or parties, but we have a certain massive MNC in India, which is a big producer of palm oil, one of the biggest funders of the incumbent government. And suddenly, after 10 years, our nutritional policy, which the health ministry releases, from 2014, it was updated in 2024. Suddenly, palm oil is a recommendation for a healthy diet. Forget the environmental aspect of,
Is
palm
it?
oil. Yes, yes, this is in. I'm forgetting the name of this health policy. You just need to Google Palm Oil India health policy. 2014 was the last draft. 2024 is the latest recommendation. And just like ghee, etc., it's been recommended. And yes, palm oil does have a few benefits, but Western science tends to lean towards the fact that it's unhealthy because it's used in processed foods more often than not.
Yes, absolutely.
Anyway, that's a whole other debate. But I'm just trying to say, suddenly palm oil is being promoted possibly because there's this particular company funding it. So similarly with firecrackers, first thing to keep in mind is the upstream is also just an ancillary industry, right? They're not producing firecrackers year around. Those same masala guys are the pataka masala guys are going to they're being used as laborers in other chemical
Yes.
factories,
Yeah,
right?
correct.
So therein also lies a solution. Today when we're talking about moving to green hydrogen and moving to reducing coal, one of the biggest debates which has come to India now was outside before was how do you rehabilitate the coal workers, the people who work in coal mines, right? Where do you employ them? So yes, there is a case to be made upstream, but I think going back to my voting wala example, for it to effect and inspire change which leads to a snowball effect, it has to come from society. And
Okay.
it's not just firecrackers, right? Today, if my car hasn't done its PUC certificate for a year, is it easier for me to shake the cop's hand, pass him 1,000 rupee note, or is it easier for me to actually
Get the POC.
yeah, it's actually easier to do the PUC. It's cheaper, but भूल गए तो कौन देगा 20,000 25,000 का fine? Better है, so it's and it applies everywhere. Don't use your diesel car after 10 years. People will forge some papers, do something. So it's across the board. It's not just firecrackers. Yeah.
Yeah, but coming back to young people.
Yeah.
So, young people don't wear helmets.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they know it can be fatal, but they don't care. So, do you think they'll care about something as invisible as air pollution? So how do you?
It's about catching them young, right? And I may be saying this from a perspective of urban privilege, but not necessarily so also. Because right now, I remember when I was in university, my college was in Sonipat. We got a week off for smog, right? And had this been pre-COVID, it was something we would have rejoiced about. But it was, I think, a year or two after or during COVID. So our professors were just like, so what? We're going to have classes online, right?
Oh, yeah.
So there's no break. But the point I'm making is that it's not just about how it's affecting academics, but at a younger age, how it's affecting interpersonal skills being built. And at a older age, also how it's affecting sports, right? You have enough kids today who are being asked, there are government advisories, they may or may not do it, but there are government advisories that go out saying, no PE class today, air pollution is too high.
Yes.
Right? So one appeal is to, again, this goes back to what I started with, right? Why should I care? So for sports people, you make it relevant to them that, you're smoking 15 cigarettes while playing just 1 hour of football. Do you really want that if you want to be a national level
Yeah,
athlete,
yeah.
right? On the other hand, one very interesting example, I was addressing a retirement home in Bangalore, and they asked me a similar question. That, and at their age, these are like grandparents and stuff. They're like, how do we convince our friends to care about this? And I said, look, you said politics and cricket. I argue that grandkids is another favorite. I said, there's this trend in India. I've fortunately not, been asked the question yet, but you see in movies and you see even across the board how, parents say good news ka bari hai after a
Oh,
wedding. So you leverage that, right? You convince your parents that you sort of need to care and walk the talk on air pollution if you want grandkids, because fertility rates are being impacted by air pollution.
absolutely.
So the bottom line I'm trying to make is you make the message relevant to the audience you're speaking to. So that's what we need to do.
Excellent. I mean, this is the second excellent. I'm just amazed. So we come to your last question. You wanted to speak about Swachh Chetna, right?
Right.
So before we wrap up, you can just tell us what you did with Swachh Chetna.
So
How
that
was
was a
it?
very interesting initiative, and again, it's classic proof of how young people need to be involved. I'll tell you quickly about what the initiative was. It was very simple. We did cleanliness awareness and plantation drives at and around Delhi metro stations.
Okay.
And I came from a very bratty school in Delhi, so I was conscious that I wanted this to be an intersectional movement. So I brought kids from government schools, NGO schools, private schools. We had 500 kids from different backgrounds doing nukkar nataks at metro platforms, doing these plantation drives. I
When
mean,
was this? When was
this
this?
was bit up, so 3 years minus 2019, so 2016 to 2019,
Okay.
broadly, give or take 6 months. And I remember at the age of 16 walking into the Delhi Metro's office, and the receptionist, I was even shorter back then. The receptionist looked over the desk, peered at me, scoffed, and said, Mummy kho gayi hai kya? What are you doing
Oh
here?
my God.
And, the night before, I was watching Modi ji talking on TV, talking about how ye Bharat ki yuva peedhi ka samay hai. And I was like, we talk about Yuva Shakti, and then we as young people are not taken seriously ourselves, right? So that made me double down on my motivation. I went to the Delhi Metro office for months at end, 3 months, once a week. Got the meeting I wanted, signed an MOU with the Metro at the age of
Wow.
16, which is probably unprecedented. Um, and this initiative is unique. I mean, if you ask me, my hot take as an environmentalist is that plantation drives are a bit overrated. In fact, they're being used as an instrument of corporate greenwashing
Yes,
sometimes.
it's a greenwashing
But
exercise.
for me, the heart of this movement or initiative actually lay in doing the Nukkar Nataks at and around metro stations. Because if you think about it, the Delhi Metro is arguably the one place in the city where you have all sections of people under one roof: blue collar staff, white collar staff, students, parents, professionals, everyone. And what do you do in the metro? You have your earphones on, you're watching Netflix, you're listening to
Yeah.
music. You step out of a train, you see like kids doing a Nukkar Natak on the platform. And that has a shock and awe value, right? So we had people standing there. The metro guards, poor guys, were fully harassed by the crowds on the station because
Yeah,
obviously
but they
it's
was
their
watching.
responsibility.
Yeah.
And we have people asking questions as simple as why should I buy a bamboo toothbrush, to asking questions like how can I get a subsidy on my EV.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that hit the nail on the head, and got people to care, disrupted their daily life, and got them to look up and learn about the issues. So I think that just goes to instantiate why young people need to be at the center of all of this.
Wonderful, 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 Abhiir. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. I hope you had a good time as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Hiteshika, if you can kindly wrap up the podcast for us.
Thank you, Abhiir, for sharing your journey and insights, and to Dr. Chattopadhyay for leading this conversation. We hope today's discussion has sparked new ideas on how young change makers can shape a healthier planet. That's a wrap for today's episode on the air we fear. Make sure to subscribe on Spotify and YouTube to explore more about environmental issues and sustainability. Don't forget to visit geographynu.com to check the detailed blogs of these podcasts. Until then, keep the conversation going and the air flowing.